afternoon. I can see some of the speakers coming on now. Ian, you will give me a nod when we have all our panelists and when we are ready to begin.
Okay, Andrew, just a few have joined, but we can just start with the round of introductions. Yeah.
Okay, so just to confirm, Ian, we have a few of our participants joining in, and then do we have all of our panelists present?
Okay, not all of the panelists have joined. Just trying to reach out to a few that have joined in a few. So just reaching out to them.
Okay, so shall we say we can start in the next 3 minutes?
Yes, please. Okay.
Okay, for those who have been able to join us so far, thank you very much and welcome. My name is Andrew Songa, and I am the Regional Advisor for African Union engagement with the European Partnership for Democracy. I'm very pleased to be your moderator today. I'm glad to be here because I represent a wider Pan-African project consortium known as the Electoral Approach to Democracy Africa, AHEAD Africa. That is a project designed to emphasize the role that citizens can play in ensuring election integrity across Africa. And this is one of the reasons we are all here today. We want to cast our eye on the upcoming election for South Sudan. And we are being hosted by one of the members of the AHEAD Africa Consortium, that is the East and Horn of Africa Electoral Observers Network, EHON. And they have managed to bring together a series of experts and well-situated speakers who are very much engaged with the South Sudan context so that they can help us navigate and discuss some of the key issues that we should be considering as the country moves closer and closer to the very pivotal milestone of its first general elections. I will allow for more discussion on what we want to achieve shortly, but just give about 2 more minutes to see if we will have all our participants joining in, and then we can fully commence. Thank you. Okay, I think now we are well placed to begin. I'm hoping that we're able to maximize on the time allocated for this webinar, because I know this is a very important discussion. And we only have until 5 p.m. to be able to have not just presentations from our panelists, but also a robust, what I hope would be a robust plenary from just to be able to interrogate this critical issue as to the readiness of South Sudan for the elections that we hope to have by the close of the year. As I mentioned, we are being hosted by EHON, the Eastern Horn of Africa Election Observers Network, and they are within the auspices of the Ahead Africa Project Consortium, and this is a contribution to part of the main objectives we have under that project, which is to public dialogue on citizens' perspectives around election integrity, and therefore be able to be active participants in shaping the electoral governance landscape on the continent. With regards to this particular conversation, which has been billed as Navigating the Crossroads, South Sudan's Journey to Electoral Preparedness of 2024, I'm sure most of us are aware that with the announcement of the intention to hold the elections has been a varied set of responses and concerns being raised by different stakeholders. I think they can aptly be summarized into a series of themes. Key questions being whether the state of South Sudan has the requisite legal and constitutional frameworks to be able to guide and govern an electoral process as scheduled for this year. Then there's the question of whether there has been sufficient stakeholder consultations and whether their emerging inputs are in fact being taken into consideration as preparations get underway, and stakeholders, of course, being civil society as well as political parties and other stakeholders who would wish to partner and support South Sudan through this process. Then there's the question of also whether they are financial and resource capacities to be able to undertake the election within the country, whether there's enough financial allocations in terms of budgets, whether there is the requisite manpower, human resource, and skill sets that would be required to undertake the election. And then also the very pertinent issue of stability and security, knowing that we cannot anticipate to have a conducive electoral environment in the midst of ongoing violence or skirmishes. And so therefore, assurances around stability, peace, and security become essential underwriting a free, fair, and credible election. And then finally, perhaps a gaze on the electoral management body itself and scrutinizing whether, in fact, they have put in place the necessary procedural and standard operating procedures that would enable them to undertake all the integral steps leading up to election day and also aftermath of conducting the election. And so to guide us through this conversation are a series of, as I mentioned earlier, well-placed and expert panelists who are very much engaged and seized on some of these issues from the vantage point of which they work. And we wish to tap into their expertise and their contemporary experiences to unpack some of these issues, stimulate a riveting discussion that can see us come up with perhaps some comments and roadmaps to what should be done in order to underwrite and ensure that we have a free fair trial later this year. And so I will cede the floor very quickly to my panelists, and I will be introducing them one by one as they speak. And so as I introduce them, I will grant them perhaps maybe a maximum of 10 minutes to provide their insights so that they can then cede the floor to the next panelist. And hopefully by the top of the hour, we will be able to then open the floor for plenary and get more insights, and you can ask them questions and they can be able to then respond to your queries or to your comments, and hopefully then we'll be able to tie up the conversation. So the first speaker that I would want to introduce and welcome to the floor is Mr. Galdino Ochama George Ojok, who is currently the Executive Director for the South Sudanese Network for Democracy and Elections, and also the Chairperson of the South Sudan Civil Society Forum. He also happens to be a lecturer of public administration in the School of Business and Management at the University of Juba, and previously worked for the State Referendum High Committee as a member and acting chairperson and head of operations. He has also worked for the National Democratic Institute and also worked for the World Bank, and has also served as a specialist for the African Union and Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources as a conflict management coordinator. He does hold a master's degree in applied development studies from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom, and a Bachelor of Science degree in public administration and management from the University of Juba, South Sudan. Mr. Ojok, the floor is yours. Kindly lay the foundation for us with regards to some of the key features and issues we should be concerned about or should be monitoring with regards to the preparedness for South Sudan's upcoming general elections. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew Songa. And I would like also to give thanks to all those who are in attendance, especially the EHON members and also the EPD and the AU. It's a good opportunity for me to share today my insight on the election preparedness in South Sudan. I'm not also forgetting my colleagues, the panelists, who are with me together. I would like just to start off with by saying that South Sudan has never conducted any elections since its independence in 2011. And one thing that we need to note is that the country plunged into war in 2013 as the country was preparing for the first ever elections of an independent state. And that conflict was as a result of the fear of the same, the fear of elections. So the fear of elections caused the trouble, and people tried to negotiate, and the peace agreement was reached in 2015. Again, another conflict erupted in 2016, and we have the RCs, which is being implemented now, agreed in 2018 by the parties. In that agreement, elections is one of the key milestones that need to be conducted. However, it has been pushed again through what we call the roadmap. So the parties again push it simply because it was difficult to conduct elections under those circumstances. When the roadmap was passed, we in the
I'm sorry, technicians, do we still have Galdino?
I think he's having challenges with his audio, probably network.
I'm sorry, technicians, do we still have Galdino?
Yeah, he's still on the call.
Galdino, if you can hear us, we seem to be having a bit of a problem with your connection. Perhaps he could be advised to turn off his video.
Okay, then I made to just reaching out to him.
Apologies to the participants. Once in a while, the technology becomes a challenge, but hopefully we will be able to get our speaker back on momentarily. Our speaker back on momentarily. Ian,
Okay,
has there been any progress?
Galdino has dropped off, but we have James Okoinda, who's from the same network, who can also really speak to the situation in South Sudan.
Speaker back on momentarily. Okay, James, then I will cede the floor to you to speak on behalf of your colleague Galdino. James, if you can hear us, over to you. I would extend 8 minutes. Ian, has there been any progress?
Galdino has dropped off, but we have James Okoinda, who's from the same network, who can also really speak to the situation in South Sudan.
Okay, James, then I will cede the floor to you to speak on behalf of your colleague Galdino. James, if you can hear us, over to you. I would extend 8 minutes. Ian, has there been any progress?
Galdino has dropped off, but we have James Okoinda, who's from the same network, who can also really speak to the situation in South Sudan.
Okay, James, then I will cede the floor to you to speak on behalf of your colleague Galdino.
Okay, sorry, Andrew, that was interference from Dr. Garang, but I've been able to mute. You can now continue.
Thank you, Ian. I was trying to grant James the floor, as you had suggested, so that perhaps he could stand in for Galdino. I don't know if James can hear me.
I think Gardino is back now. He can continue.
Okay, Galdino, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Are you getting me?
Yes, yes. So please kindly proceed, but now we would, very understandable with the internet connection, but now I would urge you to be concise and maybe utilize about 7 minutes to share your points.
Oh, yes. I would like to go a bit faster. Generally, in terms of multi-stakeholders consultation, I think the parties to the agreement have limited consultation with the multi-stakeholders when it comes to issues around elections. So basically, the decisions that are being taken are taken by the parties without consultation, even with us, the civil society organizations. We only hear surprises that this is being negotiated, the extension is being discussed, and we are not invited to present our ideas as a bridge between the people and the parties and the government. That is not happening. And in terms of resource capacity of the National Election Commission to conduct elections, I would say just they released a small amount that is not enough to put all the election management bodies in place. For instance, establishment of the state election high committees and recruitment of the national election staff, plus provision of the necessary equipment needed by the staff in order to run the elections. All these are behind schedule, and the funding is a problem. And signs are that it might not be possible anytime soon to get money in order for the National Election Commission to carry out its mandate. But let us be hopeful that if changes happen and the political will is in place, definitely we might conduct elections, but not in December 2024 as scheduled, because we're expecting right now an extension. In terms of the electoral environment, honestly speaking, I will say in terms of security, the country is not secure enough to conduct elections. And the worst is the national security law, which has been passed by the national legislature and which is expected for the president not to sign because we made a lot of noise, because there are a lot of draconian articles in that national security law, including arrest without warrant, which we have said it should be outlawed and removed from the national security law. This has gone silent, and as we speak, yesterday and today, already the law is inoperational because it says if the president doesn't sign it within 30 working days, then it is presumed that it has been signed, because the legislature, in terms of passing laws, have got that upper hand. So the environment for political parties, level playing ground for political parties, including us in the civil society, to conduct civic and voter education is not honestly conducive. But we are trying our best in such a difficult environment, and it is very hard for the political parties simply because it is also making it very difficult for them to sell their manifestos, and even for individuals who are seeking electoral positions, elective positions, those difficulties are already being seen. We hope there will be improvement in order for people to participate, in order to have free and fair and credible elections in South Sudan. The election management body, that is the NEC, the National Election Commission of South Sudan, generally is behind schedule. If you look at the electoral cycle, what is supposed to be conducted, you will realize that a lot of missing links are there. And definitely, we can simply say the law, the National Election Act has been passed, the National Election Commission reconstituted, and the state high committees has been formed and put in place. But there are problems with, in terms of spaces for those. In some counties, in some states, they do not have the offices as we speak. So that's a problem. The staff have not been recruited, and so even if budgeting has been put in place and the electoral calendar put in place, we still see difficulties in terms of getting the right staff, and then training of the staff, and so on. Civic and voter education materials is being developed, yes, by the National Election Commission, and we're in touch with them. And even the regulations for various regulations for elections that regulate the domestic observers, international observers, regulate the conduct of civic and voter education, regulation that regulate the media and the campaigns and so on, are all under development, but they have not been out yet. So this also shows the difficulty. Now, if elections has to happen, the voter registration by this time could have even taken place, but not a single attempt is in the pipeline for the registration of voters to start. We must be mindful that this is going to be the first election in South Sudan, and there is nothing called we are updating the voter register. No, it is going to be a fresh voter register, and we hope that these activities could have started much more earlier, because registering voters is a big activity and it takes also time. Leave alone the accreditation of observers, because the observation could have started right now in terms of observing what the National Election Commission is doing. So the accreditation process is not yet there, and definitely issues to do with parties and candidates, as I've just said. Parties are all mute and nothing is happening, with the exception of the ruling party having some few activities here and there, and then covered. Yes.
Pardon me, because of the issue of time.
Yes.
I will just give you.
Yes. Can you go ahead? I think I'm almost done. I'm done up to this point. I don't think I will continue because of time factor, but there's a lot to discuss as far as elections is concerned in South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure by way of plenary discussions, you will be able to get an opportunity to provide further insight. But very critical information and highlights that you've provided. I think fundamentally the fact that in your estimation, a December 2024 election would not be feasible, an extension would be required, so that very critical issues that should underwrite the election can be addressed, particularly the issue of security and stability, the issue of addressing some aspects of the legal framework, such as the security law you mentioned, the very important aspect of creating a space for multi-stakeholder dialogue so that there is a level playing field in any anticipated election becomes important. And then also you have focused particularly on the electoral management body and the incapacity that currently exists with regards to the work they would have to undertake, and the fact that they don't have the capacity to do that work of electoral preparation just yet. I'd also like to acknowledge that I can see in the comment boxes some of our participants introducing themselves. I'd encourage you to introduce yourself in the comment box, perhaps say hello and tell us where you're listening from. I can see we have listeners from as far as Brussels and South Africa. Welcome. And I can also see some already contributing to the discussion, agreeing with Galdino on the aspects of security being an important feature for guaranteeing a free, fair, and credible election, and that the fact that we do need a lot of advocacy and support from different stakeholders to enable South Sudan to work towards this milestone of its first election. But I will proceed to introduce the second panelist, who I will also give, now I have to revise it a bit further, about 8 minutes to share her insights. And I hope she's online and ready to speak. Our next speaker will be Ms. Jacqueline Nasiwa, who is a lawyer with a Bachelor of Laws degree from Makerere University in Uganda, as well as a Master's in International Law from the Oxford Brookes University in the United Kingdom. She is an experienced international law lawyer, activist, and rule of law specialist. as well as a peace building expert who is based in Juba, South Sudan, and has worked with several international organizations such as UNDP, the International Developmental Organization, IDLO, the National Democratic Institute, NDI, and the Public International Law and Policy Group, PILPG. She, in 2017, founded the NGO that is called the Center for Inclusive Governance, Peace and Justice, which works on gender inclusion, peace building, transitional justice, access to justice, civic engagement, and support to survivors, as well as undertaking advocacy. She also happens to be the chairperson of the board of directors of the South Sudan National Alliance of Women Lawyers. That is just a brief synopsis of Jacqueline, given the time, but you can clearly see she is very well-versed and immersed on the South Sudan experience, and I would welcome to share her inputs. Jacqueline, I will be granting you 8 minutes. The floor is yours. Ian, could you kindly confirm if we have Jacqueline available?
Okay, Jacqueline seems to have dropped off. We have Dr. Garang, who's still a panelist, as I try to reach her, please.
Okay, thank you, Ian. In case I will move on to Dr. Garang, who is the head of IGAD Political Affairs and Peace Building, and previously served in the mission to the Republic of South Sudan. And he has also served previously as the Director of Mediation Support of the Mediation Support Unit since 2013, and was its coordinator at the IGAD Secretariat for 7 years. He has also served in the Ministry of Justice in various capacities. And of course, by way of the experience I've just highlighted, you have probably with degrees in law from the Cairo University, and also has a Master of Laws degree and a PhD in Public International Law from LZM El-Azahari University in Sudan, and also has a Master's in Peace from Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. My apologies for the truncated introduction, Dr. Garang, but this is only in the interest of time. I will cede the floor to you and grant you about 8 to 10 minutes to provide some of your valuable insights with regards to what we should be anticipating in the next few months. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew, moderator, and welcome to all our listeners to this important conversation. I would be quite precise in terms of my interventions, given the fact that we are behind schedules. As we have heard from the previous speaker that South Sudan is conducting the first ever elections as an independent country. Doesn't mean that people may not have experience with elections. Maybe people were born after independence of South Sudan, 2011. However, the year before, in 2010, there were elections that were conducted across Sudan, and there were specific elections for South Sudan, given that it was a semi-autonomous region. That said, the National Election Commission is not a new body. It existed throughout all that period. And the second thing is that there might be an existing registry that could be updated with new names that could be added, because 2010 to 2011 is not very far of a difference in terms of who was registered and who could be continuing to be in the registry books. The second thing that I would like to clarify is that as much as we are speaking of the laws that were to be amended as per the peace agreement, these laws existed after or prior to independence of South Sudan, and they became laws of the Republic of South Sudan in 2011. So the National Security Act that has been referred to is not a new law, it's just a law that has been undergoing some amendments to address some of the concerns of the peace agreements. The recent peace agreement dictated that some of the changes that are necessary to create a conducive environment for democratization. The peace agreement itself was not meant to be a goal, but a vehicle to take us from one end to another, and therefore to end with a logical conclusion of a peace agreement ending with elections. Now, the peace agreement, the existing peace agreement, the revitalized agreement of the resolution of conflict of the Republic of South Sudan, midwifed by IGAD, will come to a conclusion on the 22nd December 2024. Now, given the fact that this is what was meant to be, the transition was meant to be 3 years, so far has been amended 3 times, it has lasted for 6 years. If this transition is coming to an end on the 22nd December, which is supposed to be now the period where the elections will take place to take us to the next stage of our democratization in the Republic of South Sudan. The question would be, will the agreement be still legitimate post 22nd December? And that's number one. And number two is, are the institutions of the Republic of South Sudan, both security-wise and the National Electoral Commission, and even the presidency in terms of enabling the conducive environment for elections, are they ready to conduct elections? My take is that as far as we are concerned, the agreement would have to come to an end at some point. And the agreement, in my view, would be concluded within the time frame unless something drastic happens. But the expected results is that elections need to take place. Now, there are a few challenges when it comes to these elections. The 3 challenges that I would like to highlight, among many, would be, number 1, the budget. The National Electoral Commission has requested a budget nearly $300 million, and a very small fraction of that amount was granted. The second issue is the timing. The National Electoral or the Election Commission, the Election Act determines specific schedules to conduct elections, which talks about registrations, and then the disputes of coming out of the contestation of names. Some of the people may claim that those names of the people in the registry are no longer alive, therefore they would be contested in tribunals, electoral tribunals. Eligibility also can be contested in the electoral tribunals, and these are not anywhere seen to have taken place so far because of the time frame. The date for elections are still questionable in terms of whether elections can take place within the planned period. Now, the political elites of South Sudan and the people representatives need to come out with a solution. When I talk about people, it should be the civil society who would voice the concerns and voices of the people. A new solution about relaxing the existing dates and coming out with a formula to address the legitimacy of the government post the 22nd December. If it's going to be 6 months or less or more, it will be also questionable in terms of the legitimacy of that government. The second thing that I would like to highlight is that there is a holdout groups. And in fact, there are 2 groups that are are holding out on this peace agreement. One group is now undergoing negotiations with the government in Nairobi in what is known as the Tuamini Initiative. But there is another group that is still holding out, and they signed a coalition recently, 2 days ago in Rome. What would be the fate of the elections, given that the peace agreement is not inclusive enough? Lastly, apart from the political issues, which includes the holdout groups, the question of legitimacy, if there will be an extension, elections as we speak, as it stands, is not meeting the required timeline as per the law, which now brings the question of, apart from the budget as a challenge, the National Election Commission is facing two things that are problematic. First, there should be bylaws. These bylaws govern almost every aspect of an elections process, whether it's registrations of voters, whether it is the type of the elections that will be conducted, how is it conducted? Is it manual or is it electronics? How can the National Election Commissions conduct its own procurement process, etc., and the timeline for procurement, in addition to the bylaws that implements the actual law. The election law is implemented through bylaws. The bylaws referred to by the law should come out of the National Election Commission. The second challenge that comes with this is how the National Election Commission itself has been formulated, given that it's formulated as part of the peace agreement. So the nomination of political parties to the National Election Commissions would leave a lot to be desired in terms of the independence of the National Election Commission. The last thing that I would like to flag, and I conclude my intervention, is that elections need civic education. Given the fact that it's been 18 years since, almost 14 years since independence, many people may have not voted in the previous elections to 2010, or even voted for the referendum of South Sudan 2011 January. There would be a need to conduct massive civic education, which require a lot of work in terms of engaging the youth, civil society groups, women groups, not only to sensitize them about how to vote and educate on how to vote, because voting would be at quite different levels. You have presidential levels, you have state levels, you have county levels, possibly quite different levels in terms of party lists, etc. And that could amount to something like 9 to 10 ballots. That needs a lot of required interventions that precedes elections in terms of education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garang, for that very concise but very enriched presentation and putting things very much into perspective. I think building on the previous speaker's analysis, you raised the pertinent question of the way forward, that if in fact we can't hold the election as scheduled, then there needs to be an aspect or a roadmap that can provide legitimacy to how the government of national unity can move forward, but that legitimacy is underpinned by commitments to resolve some of the challenges that are actually preventing the election from taking place as scheduled. So from my understanding, saying that if there was to be an extension, for example, it should be underpinned by very clear-cut commitments and guidelines towards addressing issues such as ensuring the Electoral Commission is well capacitated to in fact hold an election, undertake some of the operational issues such as ensuring we have a credible register of voters, that the bylaws and the guidelines that inform the implementation of the elections law are in fact put in place, and that also there is civic education to ensure citizenry is well placed to then eventually and ultimately take part in the election, but that all this must be inclusive and multi-stakeholder approach to dialogue, as to then creating this space for consensus that allows all this to happen. So very much appreciated, Dr. Garang. And furthermore, there are a lot of comments and queries emerging in the comment box. I'm trying to scan through them quickly, but I will admit I don't think I'll be able to track all of them. So I will just highlight a few. First, again, seeing a lot of very interesting engagements and participation. Welcome. I see a representative from RJMIC, Christopher Gitari, welcome. I see questions with regards to the role of the media in all this. The remaining panelists to be able to respond to that particular question. But is there a space for the media with regards to creating this environment for free, fair, and credible elections? A lot of agreements with regards to the concern of the security question. But then I wanted to particularly highlight one question I have, or one comment I have seen from a participant named William. He says the Election Commission currently has a lot of inner issues, fights left and right between the chairperson and his deputy, as well as the SG. The current commission, therefore, he questions its ability to be able to hold free, fair, and credible elections. So something I think also for my panelists to reflect on and perhaps think about. But then I would like to go to the next speaker, and I would ask Ian on the line. Ian, kindly confirm if Jacqueline is on the line. Okay, Ian, can you hear me? Okay, I'm not getting a response. Then I will move on and ask if Alimur Awuda is available. Ian, you're on mute. Ian, if you can hear me, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, so Madam Jackie is not yet back on the team. I have Ali Mure on stage.
Confirm you can hear me. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you, Alimur. The floor is yours. My apologies, I didn't get the bio to introduce you, so I'll just probably grant you a minute to briefly introduce yourself, and then a further 6 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you very much. To begin with, I need to apologize. I'm not in my office. This event called me up in another meeting somewhere, so I'm attending not in my office, so you might excuse me for that. Briefly, of course, I am Alimura Uda. I have been working in South Sudan on a social democracy project for the last 18 years. I specifically worked for the National Democratic Institute for about 7 years as assistant program manager, and mostly supporting the democratic processes in the then Sudan, and subsequently to South Sudan. While with the NDI, I supported the recruitment and training of national election observers for the 2010 2010 Sudan elections, and subsequently the 2011 referendum in South Sudan. Also in 2007, I participated in observing the Kenyan election, which unfortunately ended in a bloody way. And I also was a recipient of the Atlas Co. Washington, D.C., USA based youth fellowship, where I attended my fellowship on youth leadership, specifically looking at the civil society dynamics in Africa and South Sudan in particular. I also co-founded one of the vibrant youth-led think tank in South Sudan, Institute of Social Policy and Research. I also co-founded the Foundation for Democracy and Governance, which unfortunately got shut down by the government and in South Sudan. And I also conducted several uh, democracy and election-related consultancies in the country. So briefly, that is about myself. Coming now to the content, my colleagues have already spoken a lot about the background or the democratic, electoral, or the political background of our country, which I don't want to now dwell much on, but I would rather love to go specifically to the uh, technicality in regards to conduct of election contextually in South Sudan. And I would be focusing on two major questions like, is it necessary to have elections in South Sudan? That is the one question I will be answering. And is it also possible to have elections in South Sudan in December 2024? So these are some of the questions that my short submission will be discussing. And the question of whether it's necessary to have election in South Sudan, the answer is yes. We need to have election in South Sudan. As my colleague panelists have already said, we have never had election before. And this would be an opportunity for the South Sudanese people to have elections. Yes, we had elections in 2010, but that was for Sudan, not for South Sudan as a country. It was administered from a certain level. So South Sudanese are yearning for elections. They need elections. They need to participate in democracy. Personally, uh, at this age of mine, I still voted once in my life, very unfortunately. So I feel I need to vote. But now the question comes in: when do we need to have this election? Yes, if it must be credible, free, and fair. So for now, much as yes, the signs are on the wall that people need to conduct elections in December, like when the National Electoral Commission issued out pronouncing elections. That should not be taken as something practical. But the National Electoral Commission is, uh, implementing a constitutional mandate or provision of the peace agreement, where the Electoral Commission is supposed to announce election period 6 months prior to the end of the transitional period, which ends in December 22nd, 2024. So that pronouncement was just to fulfill that, but it should not deceive many that South Sudan is well prepared for free and fair elections. In the first place, there are very many parameters if we must realize free and fair elections. Number one, uh, there has never been civic education about election or democratic elections in the country. As I mentioned earlier on, that South Sudan has never had elections. Leave alone voters' education, but generally civic education. The civil population has not been alerted about elections, how it takes to do elections, what is the importance of having election, and what is even the role of the citizens to have election. That has never happened. That's why today, if you go deep into the villages of South Sudan and you begin to talk about elections, some of the people will even wonder what you're talking about, simply because they are not aware of what election is. So there's no civic election done in the country. So in this case, it becomes very challenging to say is it possible to have election in December. Not only that, the peace agreement provide for conduct of census, which will in turn, fit into the elimination of constituencies. That one has never happened. It will be very challenging. Yes, we can say it's fine, whether we do census or not. We can still use probably the current existing structures for conducting elections. That can be manageable, though it can, of course, still affect in terms of power distribution because the number or the population of the South Sudanese of 29 is not the population of today. So other areas will be deprived that way. Connecting that to security. Currently, the forces are not yet trained and unified to a national, conventional, and professional army. And to conduct free and fair elections needs peaceful environment. I was happy to see yesterday, the day before yesterday, the chairman of Political Parties Act signing into law code of conduct for political parties. And one of the code or the conduct is that somebody should not be like militarized and many other things. But this is a situation where most of the political parties or politicians are affiliated to military wings. So conducting elections, as we always know, involve a lot of disagreement. So what is the guarantee that these forces who that are staying differently, not unified, will not clash among themselves? And this one tells us that it is not yet easy to conduct elections uh, in the coming December. Not only that, we also got to do with the registration of voters if we must conduct election. And registering voters in South Sudan takes a lot of challenges, looking at the infrastructure, the terrain of the country, and even the season of the year. If we must conduct election, registration should have started a while ago. Yes, somebody might say, yes, we already had a voter register of the previous election. Yes, I even don't know how our record keeping system, how efficient our record keeping system is in the National Electoral Commission. Personally, I cannot guarantee the previous register that is something that can be updated if we need to conduct election soon. If we must conduct election, we need to start a fresh registration to give legitimacy of that register to the people of South Sudan. So it is very challenging that we cannot do uh, this activity within one day or the next remaining few months, and then we say we guarantee ourselves for free and fair election. Even voters' education has never been done. And as most of you have already known, South Sudan is one of the countries because of the 21 years long war that got affected, and most of the population are illiterate. So it becomes very challenging if you don't make a thorough awareness to the voters for us to realize a free and fair election. Yes, if elections need to be done just for the sake of meeting uh, the universal practice of conducting periodic elections, but not looking or taking in place uh, whether the election must be credible is fine. We can even do elections tomorrow. But if our target is to conduct free and fair elections, I'm saying from a technical view of conduct of election, it is not possible for us to realize free and fair elections in December. To conclude, we have not even defined the type of election that we need to do. We have not even agreed on the structure of the government that this election, should be realizing. Yes, somebody might say that one won't take long, but still, this is a country which is highly politicized because of the long civil wars, and where there are very many political actors. To come to conclusion with anything political, all the political actors or stakeholders need to be consulted. And consulting them does not mean automatically they will say yes. Some will obviously give some genuine reasons rejecting that idea. So these are some of the worries that personally I'm technically looking at, that it is not technically viable for us to agree and conduct free and fair elections this year in December. Even people are living in displaced places. Forget about people in refugee camps. People are displaced with the insecurity. People are being displaced with the flood. So all these are some of the challenges that if we must conduct election, it needs a very huge logistics to support this. And do we have the resources at hand within the short time or period? So moderator, I know that I would still say more, but for the interest of time and maybe because uh, participant might need to ask some questions, let me end here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali Murray, and again emphasizing the very important aspect of needing to concretely address the technical aspects of setting the stage for free, fair, and credible elections. Very much echoing the importance of the civic education question, lending your voice to the aspect of ensuring that the register, voters register, which is a very foundational pillar of electoral integrity, that you recommend a fresh register be instituted in order to ensure that there is trust and legitimacy in the process. I will shortly cede the floor to Jacqueline, who I can see is with us. But I also wanted to take the opportunity to just already flag, I think, two pertinent questions I've seen in the chat, but this time I want to direct them to my panelists so that when we get to plenary, my panelists will respond. So please note the questions. So to Dr. Garan, I have a very interesting question here from Sarah Birete, which I think links to the issue you raised about political legitimacy. And she asks, given the fact that South Sudan elections have already been postponed twice, what is the likely impact of a third possible extension? And what will be the source of legitimacy to lead? What are the likely scenarios? So Dr. Garang, I hope you will take that question during plenary to just as an opportunity to unpack further what kind of legitimacy can be procured in the form of multi-stakeholder dialogue to be able to safeguard, to rather prevent the possibility of a governance crisis and therefore midwife proper elections. Then to Alimor, because you just closed with the conversation around budgets, I will direct this question for you to answer when we get to plenary. And it's from Mule. And he asks, without the requisite budget in place, are there viable options and opportunities to enable or support the election process? If donors end up supporting the bulk of the budget, will there not be implications with the sovereignty of the people's vote? So that I will expect you, Alimor, to help us navigate when we get to the plenary. But now I had already introduced her previously, and I'm glad she's now able to join us. Jacqueline, I will be ceding the floor to you to provide your input to the discussion. But then I will seek your indulgence because time has really moved forward. I will only be able to extend you 7 minutes maximum to be able to give us your insights, and then we will be able to engage further during the plenary session. So the floor is yours, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, and sorry for getting in late. But if there's a specific question, or I can just respond to the guidelines that you gave me.
Please proceed with the guidelines, and then if any questions emerge, I will direct them to you during plenary.
Okay, thank you. Discussions around elections, the state of preparedness for elections in 2024. I could say that South Sudanese want to go for elections, but the question of when and how is what is critical at this moment. We have seen the Electoral Commission making some pronouncements in terms of the electoral preparedness, stating that they are ready to go for elections on December 2024 on 22nd. And we have also heard them talking about the commencement of civic education by June, July. And we are here in August, and the civic education has not yet moved forward. That means that what is required for elections to happen. And I think I'm one of those who say with peace agreement, without peace agreement, let's assume South Sudan is to go for elections. And what is required for South Sudan to go for elections? There are critical things for an electoral cycle. And for South Sudan here, we are looking at an additional requirement for us to be able to sustain elections and to go for a peaceful elections in this matter. So the context of the country also determines if we can go for elections or not. And I would say that critical to elections is electoral security. And for South Sudan and as in the continent and maybe other countries, electoral security is very important. So how do you secure the electorate so that they can have the freedom to choose and also the freedom to be chosen? And that means that we need to look at the issue of security in terms of the police preparedness, the justice institutions preparedness to respond to electoral issues that may arise. And currently, we don't have a strong police or security organs that can maintain elections. We have different security actors. We have also different armed groups in the country. And this required a unified professional national army. And until now, we still don't have that in play. And the armed oppositions, they are not yet even integrated into the national army. And these armed opposition, they are also a political wing. And that means if they are to participate in elections with the military wings and all this, how will the elections look like? This is a big question. The other issue is securing the space. People should go for elections when there are no fears. And I think in our context, there's a lot of fear. One, because also the political trajectory is not predictable. And given that there is no headway in terms of having a comprehensive peace and also consolidated national reconciliation among political elites, and also dialogue on how people can
I'm sorry, we seem to have lost Jacqueline. Oh,
Hello?
Jacqueline, we had lost you for about a minute.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Yeah, so that means that we need also political dialogue and consensus on elections. And this has not been forthcoming until now. One party is saying we go for elections, another party is saying we don't go for elections. And without a clear headway, it becomes difficult. And the other critical issue is what Alimure has just stated, like preparedness for the elections. Are we prepared practically? What is required? We need voter registration, we need the ballots, we need the finances, we need to recruit people in terms of the polling staff and all this. And this is not done. And the current state is that we only have the infrastructure at the national level for the NEC, but we don't have it at the grassroots level or at the state level. So how can they coordinate elections at the grassroots without having presence? That is a big question. And the other thing is that the civic and the political space is very important. And as I said, people don't need to fear when they need to go for elections and to vote. And if there is fear, and then people are not secure and safe to go and vote for their choice and also to be voted. And in terms of the legal framework for elections has a lot of gaps also. For example, the constituency delimitations. We don't have a constitution, and that means the electoral law should be able to cover that, and it is not covered. We are talking about 332 positions at the National Legislative Assembly. So these 332, which constituencies are they going to represent? We're already having 550, and we have the state governments, and we have the 3 administrative areas. So there's need to have clarity on this in terms of our constituencies, and then we move on. The term limit is one big issue. So if we prepare for this election now, for how long are we going to be waiting for the next elections? And this is also missing in this current legal framework. And that means we need a bigger legal framework in the form of the constitution to define our term limits. Our constitution our electoral act cannot simply define term limits. This has to be a constitutional mandated power. And currently our constitution is not even talking about term limits. The other critical aspect for us is also look at the issue of women's participation. The Electoral Act is pronouncing for 35% affirmative action for women at all levels. But when you look at the appointment at the NEC, it's really disappointing. All the 10 returning officers or poll officers at the state level, their chairs are men. So where is the gender representation here? And if you now start excluding women at the electoral body, how are you going to be gender sensitive in terms of even allowing women to be able to participate effectively with the 35%? Already there's biasness there. And I don't think that with non-gender sensitive approach to elections, women can comfortably say they are going to be availing themselves to be voted or to vote, because there's going to be mostly oversight in regards to women's participation. So these are the few. I'll leave for the rest, and then we will continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for your insights, and closing with the very important emphasis around the importance of gender equity and gender representation if we are indeed going to set up an electoral governance framework and landscape that upholds the tenets of inclusion and effective participation of all citizens. We were supposed to have one final panelist, Henry Muguzi, who is the coordinator of the African Election Observers Network, but I have now been informed that we do not have him online. So that means we can then move back to the aspect of plenary, where we can have the panelists engage and interact with some of the questions and the contributions from the floor. However, before I turn to my panelists immediately, we do have a representative from an important body that is helping shepherd the negotiation, the ongoing negotiations around the peace agreement, and that is RJMEC. We have Christopher Gitari, who is a senior advisor on transitional justice to RJMEC. I believe he can provide some brief perspectives on what he's had and maybe some insights on where things stand with regards to addressing the elections question. So, Ian, if you could, yes, I see Christopher is now online on my screen. Christopher, welcome, and I will give you a few minutes to provide some insights that can guide our plenary discussion further before I direct some specific questions to the panelists. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me. I'm sorry about if the background is noisy.
No,
my name is Christopher Gitari. Yes, I work at the Secretariat of the RJMEC, that is the Reconstituted Joint Monitoring Evaluation Commission. It is the official monitor on the peace agreement. It's created under Chapter 7, and part of its work is to monitor the implementation of the tasks given to the Artignu, that is the government of South Sudan, and mechanisms created by the agreement. And some of them include the election, what we call election-related institutions. And the panelists who have been very good have mentioned so many of them and have elucidated quite well. It actually makes my work easier, my presentation very short, because I need not repeat what they've stated. Maybe I can start with the latest. The latest is that we are in a situation where the possibility of elections is low because of the many tasks that have not been completed, as the panelists before you have mentioned. So what has happened thus far is that there was a high-level implementation panel that sat and reviewed the tasks that were to be implemented, including those related to the elections, and they came up with recommendations on how to move the processes forward. They presented this to the presidency. So what the presidency has decided is we should first determine when elections will be held based on what they call a technically informed date. That means that the technical organs, that is the National Election Commission, and also now the National Constitutional Review Commission, NCRC, are the ones to come up with a schedule that determine the date of elections. Now, the twinning of this is as a result of the provision in the agreement that elections will be held on the basis of a new constitution, a permanent, what they call a permanent constitution, and it is to be governed by a permanent constitution. So what happens is therefore that the making of the constitution then informs when elections will be held. Now, we are still in the early days of what you'd consider constitution making. The NCRC, in our view, is internally ready to then go out and undertake civic education and also to collect views and to undertake various phases of the constitution making process. But that process has not begun because of funding. As my colleagues have mentioned, the National Elections Commission has done a number of things. It has established what we call the state subsidiary bodies that has to undertake the elections at state level, and it is coming up with various role regulations and all that. But there are challenges with that, as has been mentioned by the panelists. And I think the primary challenge that we've seen has actually been even how the Election Commission has been constituted. The law expected a competitive recruitment of commissioners, but the parties found it easier to get the commissioners through political consensus. That, of course, has various impacts. But nonetheless, the commission is here and we are engaging with it. I also want to mention that there is another election-related mechanism called the Political Parties Council that my colleagues have mentioned, and it's registering parties. But a few challenges exist. A primary challenge is the registration fees of $75,000, which is being seen as exorbitant. And actually, the Ministry of Justice has contested these fees. So there's some tension there. The second is that this is related to the unification of the forces. That is, there are various armies in South Sudan with the various CDFs, but they need to be unified. Now, some parties still have armed wings. And as per the Political Parties Act, as amended, you cannot have an armed wing if you want to be registered. Now, if the unification has stalled, that party cannot register, even though it could be a significant player. So you have a situation where you have armed wings, armed parties, who are waiting to have their armies go to unification, and then they are left as political parties. Those parties cannot register, and the deadline of December 2022 has been declared, which was declared 6 months before. So you have a situation where you have major parties that are not able to register for elections because of having armed wings, and they have been locked out. So we have 29 parties registered, and there are significant parties that have not been registered. So that's a challenge to be overcome politically, because they have been impacted by the unification, the slow unification process. Now, let me just therefore conclude, because we don't have a lot of time, but there are many things that we could have discussed. I think the primary one that maybe my colleagues have not mentioned, which I can then mention, is a question of civic space. It's a major issue. And actually, there is a mediation process going on to bring in what we call holdout groups that did not sign the RRCs. That mediation process is happening in Kenya, and Kenya is mediator. It's known as the Tumaini Initiative. And one of the major protocols being discussed is what is called trust and confidence building measures. And part of it is the question of being able to, the freedom of the media, freedom of persons to associate, freedom of expression, and not to be arrested by security agencies, including the NSS. And actually, one of the major issues related to this was that the NSS law was passed, that is the National Security Service law, and an amendment was passed. And what had been agreed upon is not what was eventually passed. What had been agreed upon is that NSS would only arrest in exceptional circumstances and if there are emergency circumstances. But and that was not what was passed. What was passed is that the NSS can still arrest, but a judge can, or a magistrate can, on their own motion or on moved by somebody, inquire into the arrest. But nonetheless, the idea was that NSS should not have powers of arrest. So that NSS has been seen as a mechanism that is used to really close up civic space. So going into elections without that that assurance is a problem. But there are many more things that we can discuss. But on the overall, as we've mentioned, my colleagues have said there were expectations to be met before elections were held. Primarily, somebody has mentioned the question of the permanent constitution. And in the permanent constitution making process, there can be an agreement on the kind of constituencies and that can be part of South Sudan and the demarcation of that. Somebody has mentioned census. There was an expectation, but not very strong, that census would then help us demarcate the constituencies. There was also a question which has not been mentioned of judicial reforms. I think Ajaki may have mentioned it. There is an ad hoc judicial reforms committee that was supposed to submit its report, but it has now, I'm told, has asked for an extension. And that report then informs judicial reforms to be undertaken by a reconstituted Judicial Service Commission. So that judicial reforms was supposed to usher in an independent constitutional dispensation in terms of, an independent judicial system. So we don't have that yet. Somebody has mentioned security sector reforms, but particularly, I think, unification of the forces, their redeployment across the country to provide security, but also for them to be sensitized and trained on how to give and support election security. And then, of course, there was an expectation that there should have been some levels of truth, reconciliation, and healing amongst communities before we move into elections, which can be very divisive. That has not happened yet. Overall, we are in the throes of an economic crisis as South Sudan. We have seen serious devaluation of the South Sudanese pound because of various issues, including the war in Sudan and the global economic crisis. This has then impacted locally in terms of the government's ability to provide services, also the population's ability to really survive the very harsh, brutal economy. And we are therefore seeing economic populations in really serious distress. So to think about having elections in such scenarios is quite something. So in conclusion, those are the challenges that we face, but nonetheless, there is an expectation. And the importance of elections is that the population feels that if they're able to have elections, their leaders will be able to represent them in parliament and in other spaces and be able to push their agenda. Because currently the leaders that exist are appointees. And so the need for elections could not be more important, especially in this time. So those are the tensions that the country faces, but it's making strides slowly. But I think much more support is required. At the AU level and for the UN, there actually exists an opportunity. There exists what is called a joint trilateral task force between government and the AU, UN, and IGAD, and the agreement expects their support, and they have been trying to collaborate and get some support. And so that's some of the entry points for the AU and for IGAD and for the UN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that elaborate presentation and bringing to our attention some very important aspects, particularly the fact that there is an ongoing processing of a request to develop a technically informed date for when the elections can in fact happen, and also highlighting the fact that there is a very big role that the partners of South Sudan can play in facilitating these processes. You've mentioned IGAD, the UN, and the African Union, and then also brought to our attention some of the antecedent processes that are very critical to laying the foundations for an enabling environment of an election. So whether it's the judicial reforms, whether it's the aspect of civic space, and also the very important notion of transitional justice, which it opens up the space of dealing with aspects of the past so that there's enough social cohesion to be able to move forward. So there's a lot to process and digest here. And I will be coming back to some of the things that have been mentioned. We have about just under 30 minutes to be able to facilitate a discussion and response by my panelists from some of the issues that have been raised. So I want to circle back originally to some of the questions I asked. I think in this instance, I will start with Dr. Garang, if you're still with us, to respond to the question I had raised from Sarah Birete, who was asking whether, in fact, this extension, essentially she was asking what would make this extension different if there was, in fact, another extension of the election. What would make it different from the other ones? How would we safeguard the legitimacy of government, but then also ensure that that legitimacy is expended on in creating a proper viable roadmap to an election? Over to you briefly.
Thank you very much. I think I share the same position with Madam Sarah regarding the fact that everybody is weary about these extensions, because a transition is meant to be a short period, and it was meant for 3 years, which is the longest it could get. Usually is 1 year, 2 years. And we got a 3 years that got extended 3 times. It became 6 years now. So any other extension would not make any difference in terms of the expectations that there will be something that the transition will deliver differently. That I'm certain of, because the last extension was a roadmap where activities were itemized, timelines were provided, timeframes were supposed to be committed to, and yet nothing happened. Here we are. Looking at what are the challenges that actually prohibits developments, the main factor is a lack of political will. And there will be no other situation that creates a political will that did not happen in the last 6 years. The second factor is the finances to be able to deliver on those obligations and commitments by the government. And those finances are not seen to be changing very soon. Given the war in Sudan, the conflict affecting the exports of oil, which is the main source, the government is not factoring into its own economy the other aspects of non-oil revenue, or even the gold and other minerals in terms of the exploitations and how they factor into the economy. So in terms of those two realities, I don't see anything changing in the coming period. However, the fact of the matter is that the extension, when it happened last time, the South Sudanese people and the international community, including IGAD and the African Union, were promised that this is going to be the last extension. And we are heading towards elections. Now we see elections as not feasible, given the challenges that we talked about in terms of the time frame. It's not the capacity to conduct elections. Personally, I don't see the issue of security as a major issue. When South Sudan went for the first elections, we had more than 2 armies at the country. We had the Sudan Army in 2008 to 2010. We had South Sudan's SPLA, even though SPLA at the time was more organized and more stronger. It did not rule out that there were other Southern Sudanese militias that existed at the time. When we came to the referendum, there were aftermath of the elections 2010. There were militias fighting the government. Peter Gadet and his militia were fighting the government. There were other militias like the Morley militia of Jonglei State were also fighting the government. Yet people went for elections. So elections is not deterred by the fact that there will be some security challenges. Usually the challenge in South Sudan, like in any other country, is in the post-elections. It's not necessarily on the elections itself. And how post-elections are managed, and whether the elections will provide the change that the people are yearning to and aspiring to see, those are the questions. Now, the question by Madame Sarah was about the legitimacy if this time frame has been extended. And indeed, if a peace agreement comes to an end, there must be something else that provides legitimacy. I believe the ongoing talks can give maybe a blanket cover for a period not more than 1 year to co-opt those holdout groups. However, the holdout groups are also 2 groups. The groups that is being discussed now, who signed 8 protocols recently with the government. If their coming to the government becomes an opportunity to provide legitimacy, then 1 year time we will also be faced by the same situation where we are failing to see a political will or the finances to prepare the necessary steps for elections. I don't see any donor coming to support the government of the Republic of South Sudan when it comes to elections. Therefore, it has to be the people of South Sudan who would actually finance through their own resources or their own oil or other avenues those elections. So if 1 year from now we come to be faced by the same challenge, maybe the government will start now talking to the other holdout groups, and the circle will never end, because every now and then there will be 2-3 other groups rebelling, and then the period extended. The best approach is people commit to the fact that elections is the only opportunity to provide legitimacy, not peace agreements. And this, for it to happen, there should be a political will to actually hold elections, regardless whether this would be the most internationally recognized best practice or not. It has to be reflective of the will of the people, that they choose their own leaders. Because those in power now, they are in power, but none of them would claim that I was mandated by the people or given a legitimacy to rule. So elections will provide that opportunity. And in my humble opinion, I would think any extension should be on technical grounds, not on political grounds, that the elections environment need to be made ready. I don't buy into this notion that there should be a new permanent constitution to conduct elections, because 70 years in Sudan now, there is no independent or what we call permanent constitution. I don't think South Sudan will get a permanent constitution because they just signed a peace agreement. Because those who are also holding out and they are still fighting the government would have a say on this constitution. And lastly, as much as the peace agreements meant to reform the government, we don't see much of the reforms. The previous speaker spoke about reforms to the judiciary, reforms to the civil service, reforms to the force-based institutions, etc. And all those are going to remain work in progress. It will take time. But what would not need to wait is that whether the people of the Republic of South Sudan will choose their own leaders through a process of elections. Now, whether the elections will be the top-notch elections that we are expected to be, that will be a question, because I believe learning comes through different steps. Let's see if we can conduct an elections now. And then as we go forward, we improve on those elections. We improve on the conditions, whether the commissioners become people vetted by parliament, people who apply on their own, or whether they are independent in nature or not, given the fact now they are brought in by the political parties. So those are the steps that I believe if we do elections, let's say by April or March, still we can meet the time frames stipulated in the law and the technical steps necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garang, and for engaging my question and putting a couple of things into perspective that I think can lead to more feedback from some of the other panelists. I will be turning to Alimure to answer the funding question that I had told him to note. The question that came from Mule asking if there's an over-reliance on South Sudan's partners and donors to fund an election, what does that then say for the sovereignty? And therefore, I guess the fundamental question would be, is there a pathway, even if we were to get an extension, that would see South Sudan adequately resource its election? So I will be needing Alimur to respond to that question. But then I want to put Galdino and Jacqueline on standby to respond to a certain perspective that I believe has emerged from some of the comments I've seen in the chat, and also what Dr. Garang has just said. If in fact we are beginning to acknowledge that we have all these many challenges or hurdles that are standing in the way of holding an election that meets all the standards we would want it to meet, then it means maybe there might be a situation where some degree of compromise will be made. And we've already heard from Chris, for example, talking about a technically informed date. Technically informed date, meaning there are certain technical steps that will then be catered for, and then hoping the political will be generated where people will say, if we meet these technical steps, we agree an election can take place. But I think in all that, there needs to be the infusion of public input, public participation in whatever compromise that should emerge. In line with what Dr. Garang said, we may not be able to hit every standard that we want to hit with regards to the elections, but then in making that compromise, I think we also agreed in the discussion so far that a multi-stakeholder dialogue and public input is essential. So my question to Galdino and Jacqueline would be, where does civil society stand now in terms of the structures? If there was to be an opening for the dialogue you called for, is civil society ready to fully engage in that dialogue process? And if you are ready to engage, out of all these critical issues that we've discussed, are there some that you would define as irreducible minimums that must be factored into any consolidated agreement for the roadmap to an election? So I would hope to hear from Galdino and Jacqueline on those two issues right after Alimore addresses the funding question. So Alimore, will start with you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Mule, for the brilliant question of funding. Yeah, you know, in election, there's what we call electoral cycle. And electoral cycle appreciates elections as a continuous process rather than isolated event. So if it is not an isolated event and it's a continuous process, it means this electoral process supports or gives opportunity for agencies that need to, partner and implement electoral assistance in the said state. Definitely, the government funds elections, but of course, the government cannot fund the elections 100%. There are certain things that the government might not be able to fund. Let me talk about election observation mission, being international or domestic. This one cannot be funded directly by the government, but the support comes from international donors or funding. Of course, it does not mean by supporting this
I seem to have lost Alimure's audio. Alimure, are you still with us? Alimure, are you still with us? We seem to have lost Alimure, unfortunately. Do we have Galdino with us?
Yes, I'm with you. I'm following. Andrew?
Yes, so Galdino, maybe as we wait for Alimure to come back, I'll give you the opportunity to respond to the question I had just raised. So if let's say the space for dialogue opens up, in light of what you've heard about a technically informed date, in light of what you've heard Dr. Garang suggest that maybe we don't get everything we would want in place before the election, is civil society ready to engage in if the space for dialogue opens up? Is civil society ready? What structures are in place? And what would you consider as the irreducible minimums you would be bringing to the table of that dialogue?
Thank you very much for this important question. Yes, we in the civil society has been yearning for an opportunity to engage and we have always pressed for engagement. Unfortunately, we have not been allowed or given that opportunity. As I mentioned from the very beginning, when the roadmap was being negotiated, we were the first to say we would like to get engaged because we would like guarantees. If this roadmap is going to be agreed, what are the guarantees that it will be implemented? We would like to factor in those guarantees. And I think that is the same line that we in the civil society feel like, that allowing the parties to the agreement alone to decide and discuss on issues of major importance to all South Sudanese, I think is not the right way to do it. We would like the multi-stakeholders engagement, not only us. We even had suggested that as we engage, we would like the religious or faith-based groups to be engaged, because they also have a very big constituency to be listened to. All those have not been listened. We in the civil society are actually well organized and ready, especially our civil society bloc, the South Sudan Civil Society Forum. We have capable civil society personalities and organizations that are ready to engage and can also bring very good suggestions to the stakeholders. Now, the question will be, what are we bringing to the table if we are to get engaged as civil society members? We would like the parties to the agreement to say, yes, the people of South Sudan, all, by the way, almost over 90% and above, actually want elections to happen. But they want free, fair, and credible elections that will reflect their will, not otherwise a bad elections. That is what we got all across. And therefore, that's a sign that people feel that they are tired with the current system and with current representation, where their representatives are not the representative they have chosen. So the only option out is through elections. And that, for sure, we will, as civil society, bring on board the fact that we would like steps or benchmarks to be put in place. Assuming the government would like to extend technically, because we agree with the extension of elections only on technical grounds, not on anything else otherwise. And that's the stand that we in the civil society have. It should be extended, but on a reason that it will allow the National Election Commission and all the election stakeholders to prepare for an election that will be conducted to be free and fair, reflecting the will of the people. So the extension on technical grounds, assuming that people say 6 months, is reasonably good enough for all the stakeholders to prepare for elections, looking at the election cycle and coming up with a schedule that will clearly indicate that by this time, this is what needs to be done. By this time, this is what needs to be done up to the election date. And we will now, together with all the stakeholders, say what needs to happen here, what resources are needed. We will now be able also to negotiate and talk with the government where these resources will come from, and put mechanisms in place to ensure the monitoring of those sources of resources, so that surely they are injected in the electoral processes. That is how we look at the whole process. I tend to agree with Garan when he said that the Constitution may not be necessary at this particular moment, because we have seen it as another technical way how to delay elections. That's from our perspective. Because if we have to put a constitution in place, it will take 2 to 3 years. That means this current system is going to stay for two or 3 years more. That one is uncalled for. And I think South Sudanese are saying that. That cannot be the way forward. What people want is they want people who can truly represent them in the government structures. And possibly those very people who are elected will be the right people now to come with a people's driven constitution, rather than now the current representatives who are basically representing their parties, not the people of South Sudan. So ours, from civil society organization, we are ready to get engaged. That's my simple answer to that. And we are taking along with us the ask that need to be put on the table and agreed upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Galdino. I'll also extend 2 minutes to Jacqueline to also give insight on that similar question. Jacqueline, if you can hear me, the floor is yours, just before we close.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll add 2 things or 3. One is in regards to what is the bare minimum for us to say we are ready to go for elections. And I think I started with those bare minimum. One is, I could say, the political will. And I think our elections is a political process that require political decision. And this is where I'm saying the parties need to agree and reach a consensus. And that will also to say like people should be able to vote for them. But currently the political will is very small. We have had political rhetoric, but not political will seen in the actions towards elections. The second thing is the safe environment. And I tend to quite differ from Dr. Garang, because I just want to be more lay and practical. If we are to say we go for elections now, it will only happen in the city centers. But in the periphery, it will be even very difficult. Right now, people are not able to access the villages because of insecurity. And these insecurities all over the country, not necessarily around Juba or whatever. And this insecurity is also complicated because of communal violences which are happening. So that means we need a safe environment for us to say we go for elections. The situation of Sudan was different. By then in Sudan, the peace agreement was very clear in terms of the cessation, whether South Sudanese will go for one Sudan or they can go for a country called the South Sudan. And the unification of the forces started with the joint integrated forces, by then called the Jews or whatever. And that forces was having both the command of South Sudan and the command of Sudan. So for our case here, we still don't have those joint commands, and our forces are still scattered in the cantonment and everywhere. And people are still moving with their guns. So this environment is really not safe, and we need to have conducive environment with no fear so that people can exercise their democratic rights. Funding has been one of the big challenges. And until now, even I can say that the Electoral Commission is not fully funded because they are not able to do the tasks that are required for them under the technical aspect of the electoral processes. So sufficient funding need to be given for this process. And we know for sure, like after a term, there is going to be routine elections and all this. In terms of reconciliation, I could say we need national reconciliation and forgiveness. Currently, the social fabric is broken. And also I'll say the political environment is toxic. There's a lot of suspicion, lots of hate speech. And with this kind of environment, we cannot go for elections. So national healing, reconciliation, and forgiveness is very important. And I could say that before maybe we go for elections, we need to embrace this reconciliation and healing program so that people can be able to live together. What can civil society do in the political dialogue? We have asks in this political dialogue. There is a roadmap, which is the roadmap extended for the ending of the transition. And the purpose of this roadmap, which is for 2 years ending soon, maybe next week, is to prepare the country to go for option of elections or democratic transition. And that means that this roadmap has failed to lead us to that process. If you take what is implemented within the period of the roadmap, maybe small things are implemented. And I could say maybe establishment of the laws and also reconstitution of these electoral bodies. But more than that, there is now no much done in terms of moving these processes within the roadmap. And what is required now, we need political consensus and national consensus. That means this political dialogue should look at the national interests as well as looking at the political aspects of the country. And this is where civil society need to come in to bring the national outlook of this dialogue rather than leaving it for political dialogues. The other aspect we will ask is to have a strategy for elections. Okay, we are going for elections. What is the strategy now? Because election, as we said, is a cycle, and we require to have a strategy of how we are going to be approaching this. And without a strategy, even donors cannot be able to fund the process. And I remember in the 2011, there was a big strategy for the referendum, and donors were able to fund and support the process. So that means for this, we need to come with a strategy, not a roadmap, but a strategy on how we can engage and move forwards to election. Civil society, we have been doing a lot in terms of civic education. There's a lot of civic education programs going on. And I think we need to deliberately start doing the civic education now. And that means we need to intensify the outreach in the communities, empowering citizens to know their rights and duty as citizens and to be able to understand the electoral processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and for comprehensively answering that question. We are now at slightly above the top of the hour, which is when we should have been ending the call. So I will slowly be handing over to someone to close the meeting. But I want to thank you very much for the contributions, especially from my panelists who have richly contributed to expanding our understanding and horizons on the current South Sudan context and the roadmap to the elections, but then also to the participants who have raised very pertinent questions and provided some insights and comments. My apologies if I was not able to raise all of them from the chat, but I believe they've also been tracked by the EHON Secretariat, who will find a way of synthesizing them. But I will just close the conversation by saying, I think certain key salient issues have emerged from what we've been able to discuss today. I think one clear aspect is that there are a lot of issues and essential features that go into ensuring that elections are in fact free, fair, and credible in the context of South Sudan. This means that there are a lot of moving parts in terms of whether it's institutional reforms or legal reforms. There's also a lot that needs to be done with regards to political will, and that it is clear the set deadline of a December 2024 election is not feasible in light of those issues that need to be addressed. However, despite conceding that the environment is conducive for an election in 2024, there is also an acknowledgement, it seems, that pursuing an extension, as has been done previously, is not a solution in itself. There is need to try and have a paradigm shift as to how the extensions are utilized. And so I feel there's been a consensus gravitating around the notion of a 6-month extension that is focused on technical grounds and nothing else, and that then those technical grounds can be well stipulated and invite the perspectives and inputs of a wide array of stakeholders, importantly civil society and the public, and that within this 6-month extension, we should be able to have expanded spaces for dialogue and participation of the stakeholders I have mentioned, with a view to prescribing what Jacqueline has closed by calling an election strategy, one that may, in the circumstances, move us as close as possible to election integrity, an election that the public can stand by, can live with, and then say their sovereign right or their sovereignty has been properly delegated to elected representatives. And there are aspects already of where that conversation can go. It's about the funding for the election. It's about security guarantees. It's about both legal and procedural safeguards in relation to the election, including with respect to civic space and some minimum reforms to certain institutions. And so I feel we have created a landscape through which I would say civil society can begin to make a series of asks to the people who are engaged in these conversations of what the extension would look like. To this end, I am noting the outline that Christopher Wajemek mentioned. So the people, the high-level panel who are going to provide the advice of the technical-based extension, there is rich material here in these groups that can inform that process. And my hope is Galdino, Jacqueline, and the rest of the civil society representatives will be afforded an opportunity to engage effectively with that process. With that said, I am now going to hand over the floor to James Okonyi-Dao, who is an executive member of EHON, to perhaps carry out a vote of thanks and close the meeting. And so this is also my opportunity to say thank you once again. And it has indeed been a pleasure to moderate this session. So James, the floor is over to you to close the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. It was an honor to be here today for the important discussion on the election in South Sudan. As it was said that we want to look at and navigate actually to see the some of this way forward and solution and challenges that is concerning the election in South Sudan, where we are today discussing over. I'm very happy that most of the panelists, they have come up with some of this way forward and some of the solution and challenges that is facing the country. We know very well that our country are at the crossroad, and this coming up election, we have to look at it as something that is very important for this country, because we have two things. I used to talk about two things of this election. One, it could be a bridge for the peace building and trust in South Sudan if it's conducted credible and fair. Another one could also take the country back to the crisis if it is not well taken care of, if it is not well arranged, if it is not all the necessary arrangement and the criteria of the election is not put in order. This can take country back to the war. So we have to be careful as civil society. We have to make sure also to be proactive. We have to make sure to lobby and to put things right and to lobby our political. As it was said, this is a political will. If there is a political will, thing will work. If there is no political will, thing will not move. So there are a lot of things we still discuss, and I, as a member of EHON, we will urge all the civil society and the listeners that we have to continue lobby and advocate for the free, fair, and credible election in South Sudan. Either it's going to take place in December or not, we have to continue working together. We have to continue creating awareness, even if the election commission has not created the awareness. I think this is the time also we have to start creating awareness. And I'm very happy about our panelists, Jacqueline Nasio, Alemuro, Dr. Aleo Garang, and Galdino Cham, plus the moderator. You are highly welcome, and we are very happy. I'm very happy that you have taken the time, leave the work that you were doing, and you have taken the time to come here. You are highly appreciated. And the listener who are online, you are highly welcome and appreciated also to come and contribute. I'm seeing a lot of communication in the comment there, which are really, that's what we want. So thank you very much for this wonderful day. And I think we will organize another one again that we discuss a lot of issues that's concerning the election in South Sudan. Thank you very much. You are welcome.
I didn't want to come back in, but I'm guessing now I can officially say we have now come to a close and wish you all a good rest of your day. And as we say from here in Nairobi, kwaherini ya kuonana.